Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. The first time I saw her, I thought she was just another tourist's kid who'd wandered away from the group. Independence. Missouri gets plenty of those. Families driving through on their way to follow the Oregon trail markers, stopping at our little slice of authentic frontier life, nestled between a Casey's and a Dollar General on Truman Road. The Westfield Trading Post has been operating since 1847, though most folks assume it's just another themed attraction like the ones over at Worlds of Fun. My name's Dakota Briggs, and I've been working here for 8 months now. Started right after I dropped out of UMKC, couldn't afford another semester, and my landlord in Kansas City wasn't exactly sympathetic about late rent. My cousin Jeremiah mentioned old Mrs. Whitmore needed help at her family's store, so I packed my Honda and drove the 30 minutes east, figuring I'd work retail until something better came along. The store sits on a corner lot that time forgot. Original wood floors creak under your feet, and the smell of aged timber mixes with leather goods and penny candy. Glass jars line shelves behind the counter worn smooth by generations of elbows. Everything's authentic, down to the cast iron register that still works with actual brass keys. Mrs. Whitmore, 83 and sharp as a tack, runs the place like her great-great-grandfather did. She wears long skirts and keeps her gray hair pinned back, speaking in a soft drawl that makes you lean in to listen. The locals respect her. Even the teenagers from Truman High School mind their manners when they stop by for root beer and beef jerky. That first sighting happened on a Tuesday evening in October. I was restocking the wooden barrels near the checkout when movement caught my eye. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, stood by the counter wearing a blue calico dress with tiny white flowers. Her brown hair hung in neat braids tied with ribbon, and her black button-up boots looked freshly polished. She stood perfectly still, hands folded in front of her, staring at the candy jars with the kind of patience kids don't usually have. What struck me wasn't her old-fashioned clothes. Plenty of school groups visit in period costumes. It was how quiet she was. No fidgeting, no calling for parents, no touching anything. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, walking over with what I hoped was a friendly smile. She turned toward me, and I caught a glimpse of pale skin and serious dark eyes before she simply wasn't there anymore. Not like she ran away or hid behind something. 1 second she was standing there. The next, the space was empty. I blinked hard, wondering if I'd imagined it. Working alone in an old building can play tricks on your mind, especially when autumn shadows stretch long through the windows. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've seen her 17 more times, and Mrs. Whitmore finally told me about the rules. Mrs. Whitmore handed me the handwritten list on yellowed paper during my 4th week. The ink had faded to brown, and the cursive script belonged to another era entirely. "My great-great-grandmother wrote these," she said, settling into the rocking chair behind the counter. "Sarah Whitmore. She was the first to see little Emma." Emma. The girl finally had a name. "The rules have kept this place running for over a century," Mrs. Whitmore continued, her weathered fingers tracing the paper's edge. "You follow them, you'll be fine. You ignore them." She shook her head. "Well, let's just say we've had 3 clerks quit in the past 2 years. I took the list, expecting maybe a dozen guidelines about customer service or inventory management. Instead, I found 5 simple statements. 1. Never acknowledge Emma directly when she appears near closing time. Pretend you cannot see her. 2. If the penny candy jars rearrange themselves overnight, do not return them to their original positions. 3. When the music box in the back room plays on its own, Let it finish completely before entering that area. 4. The leather journal on the top shelf must never be opened by living hands. 5. If Emma ever speaks to you, close the store immediately and do not return until the next day. That's it? I asked, expecting something more complicated. Mrs. Whitmore nodded. Simple rules for a simple arrangement. Emma's been here longer than any of us. This was her father's store before it became ours. Her father's store? But you said your family. Built this place in 1847, yes. On the foundation of what burned down the year before. Mrs. Whitmore's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The Hartwell family ran a trading post here. Emma was their youngest daughter. The fire took them all. The weight of the paper seemed to increase in my hands. So she's a little girl who doesn't know she's supposed to be gone. Mrs. Whitmore stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. Long as you follow the rules, she won't bother anyone. She's just waiting. Waiting for what? Her papa to come back from his trading run. That evening, I stayed past closing to test the first rule. Sure enough, at 6:47 p.m., Emma appeared beside the counter. This time I forced myself to continue sweeping, keeping my eyes on the wooden planks beneath my feet. In my peripheral vision, I watched her stand there for nearly 10 minutes before fading away like morning mist. The second rule proved itself 2 days later. I arrived Friday morning to find the penny candy jars completely rearranged, peppermints where the licorice should be, horehound drops mixed with lemon sticks. Every instinct told me to fix it, but I remembered Mrs. Whitmore's warning and left everything as I found it. Around noon, a family from Lee's Summit came in with 3 young children. The youngest, a boy about Emma's age, went straight to the candy display with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they wanted. "Mama, they got the good peppermints right here," he called out, pointing to a jar that should have contained licorice. His mother smiled. "Just like the ones your great-grandma used to make." They bought $2 worth of candy and left happy. I started to understand that Emma wasn't just haunting the place. She was helping it thrive in ways that made sense only to her. The music box incident happened the following Tuesday. I was organizing inventory in the back storage room when I heard the tinkling melody of Beautiful Dreamer floating through the walls. The sound came from deeper in the building, from a section I hadn't fully explored yet. Following the music led me to a narrow room filled with antique furniture covered in dust sheets. In the center sat an ornate wooden music box with a tiny ballerina that spun in slow circles. The song played through completely, all 4 verses, before the mechanism wound down with a soft click. Only then did I notice the small footprints in the dust around the music box. Child-sized prints that led to the doorway and simply stopped. "She likes that song," Mrs. Whitmore said when I mentioned it later. Her mother used to sing it to her at bedtime. "How do you know all this?" Mrs. Whitmore walked to the front window and gazed out at the traffic on Truman Road. "Because my great-great-grandmother kept a diary. Every interaction with Emma, every strange occurrence, all written down and passed along to each generation. The journal's up there on the top shelf." I followed her gaze upward to a leather-bound book, sitting alone on the highest shelf, well out of reach without a ladder. "Why can't anyone open it?" "Because Emma's story isn't finished yet, and some stories are too painful to read while they're still being written." That night, I lay in my apartment on Blue Ridge Boulevard, thinking about a little girl who'd been waiting for her father for over 170 years. I wondered what would happen if someone told her the truth, that he wasn't coming back, that the trading post he'd left to visit was now a parking lot for a Walmart supercenter. But maybe some truths are too heavy for small shoulders to carry, even ghostly ones. The next morning, I found a single peppermint stick on the counter. placed exactly where a 7-year-old girl might be able to reach. 3 weeks passed without incident. I'd grown comfortable with Emma's presence, even started looking forward to her evening appearances. She never stayed long, just long enough to watch me close up, like she was making sure I did everything correctly. The trouble started on a rainy Thursday in November. I was helping Mrs. Patterson from Blue Springs find a proper bonnet for her granddaughter's school presentation when I heard it. A child's voice, soft and sweet, drifting from the back of the store. "Mister? Could you help me reach something?" Mrs. Patterson didn't seem to notice, still examining the selection of period-appropriate headwear, but my blood turned to ice water. Rule number 5 echoed in my mind like a warning bell. If Emma ever speaks to you, close the store immediately, and do not return until the next day. I glanced toward the back room where the voice had come from. Nothing visible, but I could feel her presence like static electricity before a storm. "Mrs. Patterson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm terribly sorry, but we need to close early today. Family emergency." She looked disappointed but understanding. "Of course, dear. I'll come back tomorrow for the bonnet." After she left, I rushed through the closing routine, hands shaking as I counted the register. Emma's voice came again, closer this time. "Mr. Dakota? Papa's letters are stuck up high. I can't reach them." She knew my name. That had to mean something, though I wasn't sure what. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, but stopped when I saw her standing by the front window. For the first time, she looked directly at me. Her dark eyes held an intelligence that seemed far older than her apparent age. And when she smiled, I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. Her teeth were too white, too perfect, like polished porcelain. "You're leaving," she said. Not a question, but a statement. Papa left too. He said he'd be back before winter. I wanted to explain, to comfort her somehow. But the rule was clear. Instead, I stepped outside and locked the door behind me, leaving her standing there in the growing darkness. The next morning, Mrs. Whitmore was waiting for me in the parking lot. "She spoke to you." Another statement, not a question. "How did you—" "Because I've been getting calls since 6 a.m. Folks saying they drove by last night and saw lights moving around inside, heard someone crying." Mrs. Whitmore unlocked the front door with steady hands. When Emma gets upset, the whole building responds. Inside, the store looked like a tornado had passed through. Merchandise scattered across the floor, shelves askew, and every single glass jar of candy lay shattered near the counter. The wooden planks were sticky with spilled molasses and scattered with broken glass. But it was the writing on the walls that really got to me. Someone had used what looked like charcoal to scrawl the same message over and over across every available surface. "Papa come home, Papa come home, Papa come home." The handwriting was shaky, childish, desperate. "This happens every few years," Mrs. Whitmore said, surveying the damage with the resignation of long experience. "When someone new starts working here, Emma eventually tries to connect with them. She's lonely." "Why doesn't she try to talk to you?" "Because I'm family. The Whitmores have an arrangement with her that goes back generations. But you're not blood. You're just another person who might leave like all the others." We spent the morning cleaning up. Mrs. Whitmore handled the broken glass while I swept up candy and tried to scrub the charcoal messages from the walls. Most came off easily, but some had been pressed so hard into the wood that they left permanent marks. "The previous clerks," I said while wiping down a shelf, "the ones who quit, did Emma speak to them too?" Mrs. Whitmore paused in her sweeping. "The first one, Timothy Hawkins, lasted 2 months. Emma started following him home. He'd see her standing in his yard at night, still in that blue dress, just watching his house. The second clerk, Jennifer Walsh, made it 4 months before Emma started appearing in her dreams. Jennifer would wake up to find muddy child-sized footprints on her bedroom floor, leading from the window to her bed and back again. What happened to them? Timothy moved to Colorado. Jennifer transferred to a store in St. Joseph. Both said they still see Emma sometimes, just for a second, in their peripheral vision. The idea of being haunted for life made my hands shake as I continued cleaning. So following the rules doesn't guarantee safety. Following the rules keeps Emma calm while you're here, but once she forms an attachment, Mrs. Whitmore shrugged. Well, 7-year-olds don't understand boundaries very well, living or dead. That afternoon, we reopened for business. I'd expected customers to notice the residual chaos, but everything looked perfectly normal, as if the night's destruction had been completely erased. Even the charcoal messages had vanished from the walls, leaving only faint shadows that could have been natural wood grain. Around 4 o'clock, a man in his 60s walked in wearing a KC Chiefs jacket and a puzzled expression. "Excuse me," he said, approaching the counter, "but I think there might be a child hiding somewhere in your store. I heard someone crying when I walked past outside." I listened carefully, but heard nothing except the usual creaks and settling sounds of an old building. "I haven't seen any children today, sir. Is there something I can help you find?" He bought a souvenir postcard and left, but kept glancing back through the windows as he walked to his car. The crying sounds continued sporadically throughout the day. Customers would ask about them, but I always claimed to hear nothing. By closing time, I'd started to wonder if I was losing my mind, until I realized the sounds were coming from the back room where the music box sat. Following the third rule, I waited until the melody of Beautiful Dreamer finished completely before investigating. The music box sat silent on its dust-covered table, but the crying continued. Soft, heartbroken sobs that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. That's when I noticed the leather journal. It was no longer on the top shelf where it belonged. Instead, it sat open on the floor beside the music box, its pages fluttering as if stirred by an unfelt breeze. The handwriting inside was different from what I'd seen on the walls, older, more controlled, written in faded brown ink. November 15th, 1846. Emma has been asking about her father constantly. I do not have the heart to tell her that Charles will not be returning from his trading expedition. The Kiowa War Party left no survivors. November 20th, 1846. The child grows more distressed each day. She has stopped eating and barely sleeps. I fear for her health. November 25th, 1846. Emma collapsed this morning. The doctor says it is consumption, but I believe it is grief. A child's heart can only bear so much sorrow. December 1st, 1846. My sweet daughter passed peacefully in her sleep last night, still clutching the peppermint stick her father gave her before he left. She whispered his name with her final breath. The pages kept turning on their own, revealing entry after entry about Emma's declining health and eventual death. But the final entry was written in different handwriting, shakier, more recent. She doesn't know she died. She's still waiting for him to come home. I slammed the journal shut and backed away, but the damage was done. Rule 4 had been broken, not by my hands, but the book had been opened nonetheless, and I had read its contents. From somewhere in the building, Emma's voice called out again. "Mr. Dakota, did you find Papa's letters? I heard someone reading them." I didn't answer Emma's question. Instead, I grabbed the journal and shoved it back onto the top shelf, using a stepladder from the storage room. My hands trembled as I climbed down, and I could feel her watching me from somewhere in the shadows. "You know about Papa now," she said, her voice coming from directly behind me. I spun around but saw nothing except dust motes dancing in the afternoon light filtering through the windows. The temperature in the room had dropped noticeably. I could see my breath forming small clouds in the suddenly frigid air. "He's not coming back, is he?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper now, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "That's what Mama's journal says." My throat felt raw, but I managed to speak. "Emma, I need to close the store now." "But you just learned the truth." Her voice grew stronger, more insistent. "About what happened to Papa. About what happened to me." The floorboards beneath my feet began to creak and groan, as if the building itself was shifting. Picture frames on the walls tilted at odd angles, and the antique clock on the mantel started chiming. Not the hour, but a discordant series of notes that made my teeth ache. "Emma, please. I have to go home now." "Home." She repeated the word like she was tasting something bitter. "I don't remember what home feels like anymore. Do you know how long I've been waiting here, Mr. Dakota?" I backed toward the front door, but stopped when I saw her reflection in the window glass. Not her usual solid form, but something translucent and wrong. Her blue calico dress hung in tatters, and her neat braids had come undone, leaving her hair to hang in stringy tangles around a face that was far too pale. 178 years, 4 months, and 16 days, she continued, her reflection growing clearer in the glass. I counted every single one. Every sunrise Papa missed. Every Christmas he didn't come home for. Every birthday that passed without his presence. The cash register's brass keys started pressing themselves, one after another, creating a discordant melody that mixed with the still chiming clock. The sound made my head pound. "I died waiting for him," Emma said, and now I could see her standing in the center of the store, no longer the neat little girl in pressed clothing. This version looked exactly like what she was. A child who had wasted away from grief and sickness, whose small body had finally given up hope. "Emma," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm sorry about your Papa. I'm sorry about what happened to you. But you can't." "Can't what?" She stepped closer, and I noticed that her feet didn't quite touch the floor. "Can't be angry? Can't be sad? Can't be tired of waiting for someone who's never coming home?" The front door slammed shut behind me. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. All the windows rattled in their frames like someone was shaking the entire building. "You read Mama's journal," Emma said. "You know how I died, how she died, how everyone died except for me, because I was too stubborn to let go." "Your mother died too?" Emma nodded, her dark eyes filling with what looked like tears, though I wasn't sure ghosts could cry. 3 days after I did. The doctor said her heart just stopped, but I know better. She died because watching me waste away broke something inside her that couldn't be fixed. The building shuddered again, and I heard something crash in the back room. Probably more inventory destroyed by Emma's emotional outburst. But I found myself less concerned about the damage and more concerned about the raw pain in her voice. "The fire that burned down Papa's store," she continued. "That wasn't an accident. Mama did that. She couldn't bear to live in the place where we'd both died waiting. She poured lamp oil everywhere and struck a match, hoping to join us wherever we'd gone. But you didn't go anywhere." "No," Emma said, her form flickering like a candle flame in wind. "I stayed. Because somebody had to be here when Papa came back. Somebody had to tend the store and keep his dream alive. Mama and I both stayed at first, but she got tired of being angry and sad all the time. She moved on to whatever comes next." "Why didn't you go with her?" Emma looked at me like I'd asked the most obvious question in the world. Because Papa doesn't know where to find me if I'm not here. This is the last place he saw me. This is where I have to wait. I sank down onto a wooden crate, suddenly exhausted by the weight of her story. Emma, your Papa died in 1846, the Kiowa. I know. Her voice cracked like breaking glass. I've known for decades. But knowing and accepting are different things, aren't they, Mr. Dakota? She was right, and we both knew it. I've been pretending my own father might come back someday, even though he'd walked out when I was 12 and never looked back. I'd been working at this store partly because I hoped he might drive through Independence someday and see me through the window. The other clerks, I said slowly. Timothy and Jennifer. What did you want from them? Company, Emma said simply. Someone who wouldn't leave. Someone who might understand what it feels like to be abandoned by the people who are supposed to love you most. But they did leave. Everyone leaves. Emma's form solidified again, becoming more like the neat little girl I'd first seen. Even Mrs. Whitmore will leave someday. She's 83 and her heart isn't as strong as it used to be. Then it'll just be me again, waiting for the next person to come along and pretend to care. The building had stopped shaking, but the temperature remained uncomfortably cold. I could see frost forming on the inside of the windows, despite the November weather outside being merely chilly, not freezing. What do you want from me, Emma? She studied my face for a long moment before answering. I want you to tell me the truth. About Papa. About me. About why I can't seem to leave this place even though I know he's never coming back. This felt like dangerous territory, but her pain was so genuine that I couldn't bring myself to lie or deflect. I think, I said carefully, that you're afraid if you let go of waiting for him, you'll have to admit that he chose to leave you behind. Emma's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked like nothing more than a confused 7-year-old girl. Papa didn't choose to leave. He died on the trail. I know, but you were 7 when he left. And 7-year-olds don't always understand the difference between choosing to leave and being forced to leave. Sometimes they just know that the person they love most in the world is gone, and it feels like abandonment either way. The silence stretched between us for nearly a minute. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear it. Mrs. Whitmore's great-great-grandmother wrote in her journal that I whispered Papa's name when I died. But that's not what I really said. She looked directly at me, her eyes holding a sadness too deep for any child to carry. I said, Papa, why didn't you take me with you? Because even at the end, I thought he'd left me behind on purpose. The frost on the windows began to melt, and warmth slowly returned to the room. Emma's form started to fade around the edges. I think, she said, becoming more translucent with each word, that I'm very tired of being 7 years old. Then she was gone, leaving me alone in a store that suddenly felt empty in a way it never had before. On the counter, I found a single white peppermint stick, not the kind we sold now, but an old-fashioned one that looked hand-pulled and twisted. Next to it was a folded piece of paper with my name written in a child's careful handwriting. Inside, in the same shaky script I'd seen on the walls, were 2 simple words. Help me. I didn't sleep that night. Emma's note lay on my kitchen table like an accusation, 2 words that carried the weight of almost 2 centuries of grief. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her translucent form fading away after asking for something I had no idea how to give. At 6 a.m., I called Mrs. Whitmore. She asked you for help, she said after I'd explained everything. Her voice carried no surprise, only a weary kind of acceptance. I've been expecting this day for years. What do you mean? Come in early today. There are things I need to show you before we open. I found Mrs. Whitmore in the back room, standing beside a trunk I'd never noticed before. It was old leather with brass fittings, tucked behind a stack of period furniture under a dust sheet. This belonged to Emma's mother, Rebecca Hartwell, Mrs. Whitmore said, lifting the lid. Inside were carefully preserved items: a woman's Bible, a few pieces of jewelry, some clothing, and a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The Whitmores saved what they could from the fire. She handed me the letters. The top envelope was addressed in a masculine hand. Mrs. Rebecca Hartwell and little Emma, Independence, Missouri Territory. These are from her father? Charles Hartwell wrote to them every week during trading season. The last letter arrived 2 days after Emma died. Mrs. Whitmore's fingers traced the edge of the trunk. Rebecca never opened it. She died clutching it, still sealed. I stared at the yellowed envelope, understanding immediately. Emma doesn't know about this letter. How could she? She died before it arrived, and her mother was too consumed by grief to share it. For over 170 years, Emma has believed her father forgot about her on his final trip. What does it say? Mrs. Whitmore shook her head. I've never opened it either. That's Emma's choice to make. But she's dead. How can she? Just because someone dies doesn't mean their story ends, Dakota. Sometimes it just means they get stuck in the middle of a chapter and can't turn the page. The morning hours dragged by with unusual slowness. A few tourists stopped in, bought postcards and candy, but the store felt different somehow, expectant, like the air before a storm. Emma didn't appear, but I could sense her presence everywhere, in the way shadows fell at odd angles, in the faint scent of peppermint that lingered near the counter, in the way the floorboards creaked when no one was walking on them. Around noon, Mrs. Whitmore approached me with another revelation. There's something else you need to understand about Emma, she said, her voice low. She's not just haunting this building, she's holding it together. What do you mean? The Westfield Trading Post should have been torn down decades ago. The foundation is cracked, the support beams are rotted, and half the electrical system violates every safety code in Jackson County. But it never fails inspection. The building inspector comes through every year, and somehow finds everything in perfect condition. I looked around at the store with new eyes, noticing things I'd overlooked before. The wooden floors that should have sagged with age remained level and solid. The windows that should have been clouded with grime stayed crystal clear. Even the cast iron register, which had to be well over a century old, functioned perfectly without maintenance. Emma's been preserving this place through sheer will, Mrs. Whitmore continued, keeping her father's dream alive the only way she knows how. But that kind of spiritual energy takes a toll. She's been pouring herself into these walls for so long that letting go might mean the whole building comes down with her. So helping her move on could destroy the store? Possibly. Probably. Mrs. Whitmore straightened a display of hand-carved wooden toys. But keeping her trapped here isn't fair either. She's been 7 years old for nearly 2 centuries, Dakota. That's not living, it's just existing. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, a man in his 40s wearing a Missouri Historical Society badge, carrying a leather satchel and looking around the store with obvious interest. Are you the owner? He asked Mrs. Whitmore. I am. Can I help you? Dr. Marcus Webb, State Historical Preservation Office. We've received some interesting reports about this location. He pulled out a tablet and showed us several photographs. These thermal images were taken by a paranormal investigation team last month. They show significant temperature variations and what appears to be electromagnetic anomalies centered around your building. The images clearly showed cold spots throughout the store, with one particularly intense area near the counter where Emma usually appeared. "We're not here to debunk anything," Dr. Webb continued. "Quite the opposite. The state is considering designating this location as a historical site of supernatural significance. It would bring tourism revenue and preserve the building permanently." Mrs. Whitmore and I exchanged glances. Tourist money would be nice, but the idea of paranormal investigators tramping through Emma's sanctuary made my stomach turn. "What would that involve?" Mrs. Whitmore asked. "Regular monitoring, controlled investigations, possibly filming for documentaries. We'd want to establish communication protocols with whatever entity is present here." "I don't think that's a good idea," I said quickly. Dr. Webb looked surprised. "Oh? Have you experienced something?" Before I could answer, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost began forming on Dr. Webb's tablet screen, and his breath became visible in small puffs. The cash register's keys started pressing themselves in a rapid staccato rhythm that sounded almost like Morse code. "Fascinating," Dr. Webb whispered, pulling out an electromagnetic field detector that immediately began shrieking. "The readings are off the charts." That's when Emma appeared, not in her usual translucent form, but solid and vivid, standing directly in front of Dr. Webb, with her arms crossed and a scowl that would have done credit to any living 7-year-old. "Go away," she said clearly. "This is my papa's store, not your playground." Dr. Webb stumbled backward, his equipment clattering to the floor. Did that child just... "Yes," I said, moving between him and Emma. "And I think you should listen to her." Emma looked at me with something that might have been gratitude before turning back to Dr. Webb. "I don't want strangers poking at me with machines. I don't want people treating me like a circus act. I just want to be left alone." "But the historical significance," Dr. Webb began. "Doctor," Mrs. Whitmore interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who dealt with bureaucrats for 8 decades. "I think you've gotten all the evidence you need. Perhaps it's time to go." After Dr. Webb left, still muttering about unprecedented paranormal manifestations, Emma remained visible, sitting on the counter and swinging her legs like any bored child. "Thank you," she said to me, "for not letting him turn me into a tourist attraction." "Emma," I said carefully, "I found something that might help you. Something your father left for you." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I retrieved the unopened letter from the back room and held it out to her. "This arrived after you. After you got sick. Your mother never opened it." Emma stared at the envelope like it might bite her. What if it says goodbye? What if he decided not to come back? What if it doesn't? She reached for the letter with trembling fingers, then stopped. "Will you read it to me?" I'm scared to read it alone." I nodded and carefully opened the envelope that had waited 178 years to deliver its message. The paper was fragile, brittle with age, but Charles Hartwell's handwriting remained clear and strong. I unfolded the letter carefully while Emma watched with an expression caught between hope and terror. "November 28th, 1846, I began reading aloud, 'My dearest Rebecca and my precious little Emma.'" Emma made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. She pressed her hands to her mouth, her dark eyes fixed on the letter, as if she could absorb her father's words through sight alone. "This may be my final correspondence before winter sets in," I continued. "The trading has gone better than expected, but I fear I have grave news to share. 3 days ago, our party was approached by a Kiowa band near the Arkansas River crossing. What began as a peaceful negotiation turned violent when one of our men, a fool named Hutchins, drew his weapon without cause. Emma's face had gone pale. Even Mrs. Whitmore leaned closer to listen. The fighting was brief, but brutal. 5 of our party were killed, including Hutchins, whose foolish actions started the bloodshed. I sustained a wound to my leg that has become infected, and our guide believes the Kiowa will follow us to ensure we do not return, with more armed men. I paused, seeing the fear growing in Emma's eyes. But there was more to read. I write this letter knowing I may not survive the journey home, but if these words reach you, know that every moment away from independence has been agony, not because of hardship or danger, but because every sunrise that finds me on this trail is another day. I am not holding my little Emma, not listening to Rebecca's voice, not sitting by our fire in the evening sharing stories of the day's adventures. Emma's hands had dropped from her mouth. Tears, real tears, though I still wasn't sure how a ghost could cry, traced silver paths down her cheeks. Emma, my sweet daughter, if something happens to me on this journey, I need you to understand something that I fear I have never said clearly enough. You are the reason I work so hard. You are the reason I brave these dangerous trails and spend months away from home. Every trade I make, every mile I travel, every risk I take is to build something worthy of you. A life where you will never want for anything, where you can grow up safe and loved and proud of your papa. The building around us had gone completely silent. Even the usual creaks and settling sounds had stopped, as if the store itself was listening. I know that 7 years old seems very young to understand such things, but you are the brightest child I have ever known, brighter than any star in the sky above this cursed trail. When you smile, the whole world becomes a better place. When you laugh, I remember why God put joy into this world. When you run to greet me at the end of a long day, I feel like the richest man who ever lived. Emma was sobbing now, her small frame shaking with the force of emotions too large for her ghostly form to contain. The temperature in the room fluctuated wildly, hot and cold in waves that made my skin tingle. If I do not return from this journey, know that it is not because I chose to leave you. Know that every breath I draw on this earth is drawn in the hope of seeing your face again. Know that if there is any way at all, to come back to you, I will find it. Even if I must crawl across 1,000 miles of wilderness, even if I must bargain with the devil himself, I will come home to my little Emma. The letter trembled in my hands. Emma had wrapped her arms around herself and was rocking back and forth like she was trying to self-soothe the way she might have as a living child. But if fate prevents my return, I need you to do something for me, my darling girl. I need you to grow up. I need you to become the remarkable woman I know you will be. I need you to live a full and happy life, to find someone worthy of your love, to have children of your own someday, who will carry the best parts of both of us into the future. Papa, Emma whispered, the word barely audible. Do not spend your life waiting for me, sweet Emma. If I cannot come home to you in this world, then I will wait for you in the next one. But live first. Live fully and joyfully and without regret. Make friends, learn new things, see places beyond independence. Be brave enough to love and lose and love again. Promise me, my little star, that you will not let missing me stop you from becoming everything you were meant to be. I looked up at Emma, whose crying had quieted, but whose pain was still written across her face like words on a page. There's more, I said gently. She nodded for me to continue. Tell your mama that I love her beyond measure, and that my only regret in this life is not telling her every day how grateful I am that she chose to share her heart with a rough man like me. Tell her that if anything happens to me, she must not blame herself or spend her life in mourning. she is too good, too precious, too full of life to waste it on grieving for the dead. Mrs. Whitmore had tears in her eyes now, too. She knew, as I did, that Rebecca Hartwell had done exactly what her husband had begged her not to do. I have enclosed with this letter the deed to our trading post and all our holdings in Independence. If I do not return, sell everything and use the money to build a new life somewhere beautiful, somewhere peaceful, somewhere that will make you both happy. Do not try to preserve my memory by keeping a business that will only remind you of my absence. Emma's sobs started again, but they sounded different now, less desperate, more like the natural grief of someone finally able to mourn properly. The sun is setting, and our guide says we must move at first light to stay ahead of pursuit. I pray this letter finds you both healthy and safe. I pray that I will be able to deliver it in person, to see Emma's face light up when I read her the parts about being my little star, to hold Rebecca close and promise never to leave on another trading expedition. I cleared my throat, preparing to read the final paragraph. But if this letter is all that remains of me, know that I died thinking of home. I died loving you both more than life itself. I died grateful for every moment we shared, every laugh we shared, every sunset we watched together from the porch of our little trading post. You made my life worth living, and if there is justice in this world, death will only be a brief separation before we are reunited in a place where no one ever has to say goodbye. The letter was signed with a shaky hand. Forever your devoted husband and papa, Charles Hartwell. Silence filled the store for long minutes after I had finished reading. Emma sat motionless on the counter, staring at nothing, processing words she'd waited nearly 2 centuries to hear. Finally, she spoke in a voice small and broken. He loved me. Yes, I said simply. He loved you very much. He didn't want to leave me. No, he didn't want to leave you. He wanted me to grow up, to live. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But I didn't. I stayed 7 years old and I stayed in this store and I wasted everything he wanted from me. Mrs. Whitmore moved closer to Emma. Child, you couldn't have known. Your mama never opened that letter. How could you have understood? Because I should have trusted him, Emma said, her voice gaining strength. I should have remembered how much he loved me instead of thinking he abandoned me. I should have been brave like he asked me to be. The building began to shudder slightly, but this felt different from Emma's previous emotional outbursts. This felt like something loosening, like chains being broken after centuries of binding. Emma, I said carefully, it's not too late. She looked at me with eyes that seemed older somehow, as if hearing her father's words had allowed her to finally begin aging past 7 years old. What do you mean? Your father wanted you to live. Maybe you can't do that in the way he meant, but you can stop existing and start, I don't know, being at peace, being free. Emma was quiet for a long time, considering this. Around us, the store continued its subtle shaking, and I noticed that some of the older items on the shelves were beginning to show their true age: wood splitting, metal tarnishing, fabric fading. If I let go, Emma said finally, what happens to Papa's store? It becomes just a building, Mrs. Whitmore said honestly. Old wood and glass and memories. And what happens to me? Neither of us had an answer for that question. Emma nodded as if she hadn't expected one. I think, she said slowly, that I'm ready to find out. The process began at sunset. Emma sat quietly on the counter for the rest of the afternoon, occasionally asking me to reread certain passages from her father's letter. Each time I spoke, Charles Hartwell's words aloud, something shifted in the building around us. Subtle at first, then increasingly noticeable. The cash register's brass keys stopped their random pressing. The music box in the back room fell silent. Even the usual creaks and groans of settling wood faded to nothing, as if the building was holding its breath. "I can feel it," Emma said, as the last customer of the day left with a bag of penny candy. "Everything I've been holding on to. It's like I've been clenching my fists for so long that I forgot I could open my hands." Mrs. Whitmore locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. "Are you afraid?" she asked Emma. "Yes," Emma admitted, "but I'm more tired than afraid. I want to see what comes next." As darkness settled over Independence, the changes accelerated. The perfectly preserved merchandise began showing its true age. Leather goods cracking, fabric yellowing, metal developing rust spots that spread like stains across surfaces. The wooden floors, which had remained level and solid for decades, started to sag and warp. "It's happening faster than I expected," Mrs. Whitmore murmured, running her hand along a shelf that was beginning to bow under the weight of aging inventory. Emma stood up from the counter, and I noticed that she looked different. Still 7 years old, but somehow more substantial, more present than she'd ever appeared before. Her blue calico dress was clean and pressed again, her braids neat and tied with fresh ribbon. "I need to do something before I go," she said. "Something I should have done a long time ago." She walked to the back room and we followed. The music box sat on its table, but now it looked like what it truly was, a toy that had been gathering dust for over a century. Emma reached out and touched it gently. "This was Mama's," she said. "Papa bought it for her on their first anniversary. She used to wind it up and dance while it played, trying to make me laugh when I was fussing." The box opened at her touch, and the tiny ballerina began to spin. But instead of Beautiful Dreamer, it played a different tune, something I didn't recognize, sweet and melancholy. "That's the song Papa hummed when he worked," Emma explained. "He made up the words himself, about a little girl who was braver than dragons and smarter than foxes." She smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, it reached her eyes. I'd forgotten about that song until just now. As the melody played, Emma began to change. Not aging exactly, but becoming more like the memory of herself, rather than the desperate, clinging spirit she'd been. Her edges grew softer, her form more luminous. "There's something else," she said, walking to a section of the floor near the window. "Under here. Something I hid from everyone, even Mama." She knelt down and pressed her small hand against a particular floorboard. It lifted easily, revealing a shallow space beneath. Inside was a small wooden box, no bigger than a jewelry case. "What is it?" I asked. Emma opened the box carefully. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a simple silver locket and a handful of pressed flowers. "Papa gave me this locket before he left for his last trip," she said, lifting it with reverent fingers. "He said it was to keep his love close to my heart while he was away. The flowers are from our garden, the ones Mama and I planted together the spring before she got sick." Mrs. Whitmore gasped. "Emma, these flowers, they're over 170 years old. They should have crumbled to dust decades ago." "I kept them perfect the same way I kept everything else perfect," Emma said simply, "by refusing to let time pass." She looked at the preserved blooms, tiny roses and forget-me-nots that still held traces of their original color. "But flowers are supposed to fade, aren't they? That's what makes them precious. The fact that they don't last forever." She closed the box and held it against her chest, As she did, the building around us groaned audibly. A crack appeared in the wall near the window, spreading slowly across the aged plaster. "Emma," I said, suddenly concerned, "what's happening?" "I'm letting go," she said peacefully. "All of it. The store, the memories, the pain. Everything I've been holding on to because I was afraid to face the truth." More cracks webbed across the walls. The ceiling began to sag in places, and I heard the distinct sound of nails pulling free from wood as joints that had been held together by Emma's will began to separate. "We need to get out of here," Mrs. Whitmore said, but her voice carried resignation rather than panic. "The building's going to collapse." Emma nodded, but not yet. "There's one more thing." She walked to the leather journal on its high shelf, and this time it floated down to her hands without need of a ladder. She opened it to the last entry, the one about her death, and I watched as new words appeared on the page, written in her own careful script. "I understand now. Papa didn't leave me. He died trying to come home to me. And Mama didn't abandon me either. She just couldn't carry the weight of our grief anymore. They both loved me enough to want me to be happy, to grow up, to live the life they couldn't give me themselves. I see that now. I forgive them for dying. I forgive myself for not trusting their love. And I'm ready to stop being 7 years old." As she wrote, Emma's form grew brighter and more translucent. The building's deterioration slowed, as if it was waiting for her to finish. "Thank you," she said to me and Mrs. Whitmore, "for reading Papa's letter, for helping me understand, for treating me like a person instead of just a ghost." "What will happen to you now?" I asked. Emma smiled, and this time she looked like exactly what she was, a little girl who had finally received the love and reassurance she'd been waiting for. "I think I'm going to find out what comes after waiting. Maybe I'll see Papa and Mama again. Maybe I'll become something else entirely. But either way, I won't be afraid anymore." She set the journal on the counter and walked to the front door. Her hand passed through the lock, but somehow the door swung open anyway. "Goodbye, Papa's store," she said softly. Then to us, "Take care of each other, and don't mourn for me. I've done enough mourning for all of us." Emma stepped outside into the Missouri night. The moment her foot touched the sidewalk beyond the store's threshold, she began to fade. But not like she was disappearing, like she was becoming part of something larger, something brighter. The last thing we saw was her smile, peaceful and free, before she dissolved into starlight. Inside the store, the deterioration stopped immediately. The building didn't collapse, but it had clearly aged decades in a matter of hours. Shelves sagged, walls showed water damage and wear, floors creaked with genuine old age rather than supernatural presence. "It's just a building now," Mrs. Whitmore said quietly. "Nothing more, nothing less." I picked up the journal Emma had left behind. The pages were blank except for one final entry, written in handwriting that seemed to shift between a child's careful letters and an adult's flowing script. My name was Emma Hartwell. I was 7 years old when I died, but I lived to be 185. I spent 178 years afraid that love could abandon me. But I learned that real love never leaves. It just changes form. Papa's love became my strength to let go. Mama's love became my courage to forgive. And their love together became my permission to finally grow up. Thank you for helping me remember that being loved is worth the risk of losing that love. Thank you for teaching me that endings can be beginnings. The store is yours now. Do with it what you will. Love, Emma Hartwell, no longer waiting. Mrs. Whitmore wiped tears from her eyes. What do we do now? I looked around at the aged but stable building, at the merchandise that would need replacing, at the legacy of love and loss that filled every corner. I think, I said slowly, we keep it running. Not as a monument to waiting, but as a place where people can find what they're looking for, even if they don't know what that is yet. Outside, snow began to fall, the first snow of winter, gentle and clean, covering Independence in a blanket of fresh possibility. 3 weeks after Emma's departure, the Westfield Trading Post reopened to the public. The transformation had been remarkable. What supernatural preservation had hidden, honest restoration revealed. The building's bones were solid, better than solid, actually. Charles Hartwell had built his trading post to last, and beneath Emma's protective but stagnant influence, like craftsmanship that put modern construction to shame. Mrs. Whitmore and I had spent those weeks cleaning, repairing, and restocking. The work felt good, purposeful in a way that simply maintaining Emma's frozen tableau never had. We replaced cracked glass jars with new ones that looked appropriately antique, but actually held candy safely. We repaired sagging shelves and reinforced the floor where decades of suppressed settling had finally caught up. The most surprising discovery came when we cleared out the back storage room. Behind Emma's music box table, hidden by years of accumulated furniture and dust sheets, we found Charles Hartwell's original inventory ledgers, pages and pages of meticulous records, written in the same strong hand I'd seen in his final letter. "Look at this," Mrs. Whitmore said, running her finger down a column of entries from 1846. He recorded every transaction, every customer, every piece of merchandise. Emma wasn't just preserving the building, she was trying to keep her father's work alive. The ledgers revealed something else. Charles Hartwell had been more than just a trader. He'd given credit to struggling families, donated supplies to travelers in need, and regularly sent money back to relatives in Kentucky who'd helped him get started. His business had been built on generosity, as much as profit. No wonder Emma couldn't let it go, I said. This place represented everything good about her father. Our first day back in business brought curious visitors. Word had spread about the incident 3 weeks earlier. Neighbors reporting strange sounds and lights, followed by complete silence. Some came expecting to find paranormal activity. Others arrived hoping the weird occurrences were finally over. Mrs. Patterson from Blue Springs was among the first through the door, still looking for that bonnet for her granddaughter. "The place feels different," she said, examining our restocked shelves. "Lighter somehow, more welcoming." She wasn't wrong. Without Emma's desperate energy saturating every corner, the store had developed a peaceful atmosphere. Customers lingered longer, chatted more freely, and seemed genuinely happy to be there rather than simply curious about local folklore. Dr. Webb returned on our third day, carrying the same electromagnetic detection equipment that had malfunctioned during his previous visit. "The readings are completely normal now," he said, disappointment clear in his voice. "Whatever phenomenon was occurring here has ceased entirely." "Maybe that's for the best," I suggested. He shrugged and packed up his gear. "From a preservation standpoint, yes. But from a research perspective, we've lost a unique opportunity to document genuine paranormal activity." After he left, Mrs. Whitmore and I shared a knowing look. Emma had made the right choice. She deserved peace, not to become a subject of scientific curiosity. The real test came when the first school group arrived, 35 fourth graders from Independence Elementary, the same age Emma had been when she died. Their teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, had brought them to learn about frontier life and local history. I watched nervously as the children explored the store, touching merchandise and asking rapid-fire questions about everything from the cast iron register to the penny candy selection. Any one of them could have been Emma, curious and energetic and full of life. But no translucent figure appeared to watch them with longing eyes. No cold spots developed around the counter. The building remained peacefully, ordinarily quiet. One little girl with braids similar to Emma's approached me near closing time. "Mister, did a kid really used to live here a long time ago?" "Yes," I said carefully. "A little girl named Emma. This was her father's store." "What happened to her?" I glanced at Mrs. Whitmore, who nodded encouragingly. "She got sick and died very young. But I think she was happy here, with her family." The girl considered this seriously. "That's sad, but at least she had people who loved her." "Yes," I said, my throat tightening slightly. "She had people who loved her very much." After the school group left, Mrs. Whitmore found me sitting in the back room, staring at Emma's music box. It hadn't played since the night she left, but I'd kept it there anyway, polished and clean. "You're thinking about her," Mrs. Whitmore observed. "I miss her," I admitted. "Is that strange? Missing a ghost?" "No stranger than a ghost missing the living." Mrs. Whitmore settled into the chair across from me. "Emma was part of this place for so long that her absence feels almost physical. But you know what I've noticed?" "What?" "The children who visit now actually play. They laugh and run around and behave like children should. When Emma was here, kids always seemed subdued, like they sensed something sad in the air. Now they can just be kids." She was right. The atmosphere had shifted from melancholy preservation to genuine joy. Families stayed longer, took more pictures, and actually seemed to enjoy learning about frontier history, rather than simply enduring it. That evening, as I was locking up, I found an envelope that had been slipped under the door. My name was written on it in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a note from Timothy Hawkins, the first clerk who'd quit after Emma began following him home. "Dakota, I heard through the grapevine that something changed at the store. I've been living in Colorado for 2 years, but I wanted you to know that 3 weeks ago, something changed for me too. I haven't seen her since then. No more glimpses in my peripheral vision. No more dreams about a little girl in a blue dress. I don't know what you did, but thank you. I can finally sleep peacefully again. I've enclosed my forwarding address in case you ever want to talk to someone who understands. Take care of that place. Despite everything, it's special. Tim Hawkins." The next day brought a similar letter from Jennifer Walsh in St. Joseph, reporting the same experience. Emma's attachments to her former companions had dissolved along with her earthly presence. 2 months later, we received an unexpected visitor. A woman in her 70s approached the counter with careful steps and bright, curious eyes. "Excuse me," she said, "but I believe my ancestor used to own this building. Charles Hartwell?" Mrs. Whitmore and I exchanged glances. "You're related to Charles Hartwell?" "His great-great-granddaughter. My name is Helen Hartwell Morrison. I've been researching family history and discovered references to a trading post in Independence. I had to see it for myself." We spent the afternoon sharing what we knew about Charles and Emma, though we kept the supernatural elements vague. Helen examined the old ledgers with fascination and listened intently as we described the building's history. "I have something that might interest you," she said eventually, pulling a small daguerreotype from her purse. "This is the only photograph of Emma that survived." The image showed a serious-faced little girl in a blue calico dress, standing beside a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Charles Hartwell looked exactly as I'd imagined him. Strong, caring, devoted to his daughter. "She looks like she was loved," I said. "Very much so. Family stories say she was the light of his life." Helen studied the photograph fondly. "I'm glad this place still exists. Charles would have been proud to know his work continued for so many generations." After Helen left, promising to send copies of other family documents she'd discovered, Mrs. Whitmore and I stood quietly in the store that had seen so much love, loss, and finally, healing. "Do you think Emma found them?" I asked. "Her parents?" "I hope so," Mrs. Whitmore replied. "But even if she didn't, I think she found something just as important." "What's that?" "The courage to stop waiting and start living. Even if that living had to happen somewhere else." As winter deepened around Independence, the Westfield trading post settled into its new rhythm. We served customers, preserved history, and honored the memory of the Hartwell family without being haunted by their tragedy. Sometimes, when the afternoon light hit the windows just right, I thought I caught a glimpse of a little girl in a blue dress. But it was always just reflection and shadow, memory made visible by hope rather than supernatural presence. Emma Hartwell had finally gone home, and we had learned to carry on the work her father had started, not out of duty to the dead, but out of love for the living. I'm writing this on the anniversary of Emma's departure, sitting in the same chair where Mrs. Whitmore used to rock while keeping watch over her family's store. She passed peacefully in her sleep last spring, leaving the Westfield trading post to me in her will along with a handwritten note. "Keep Charles Hartwell's dream alive, but don't be afraid to let it grow." The store thrives now in ways it never could when Emma's protective energy held it frozen in time. We've expanded into the adjacent building, creating a proper museum section where visitors can learn about Independence's role in westward expansion. Charles Hartwell's story has become central to our exhibits, not as a tragedy, but as an example of the love and sacrifice that built the frontier. Helen Morrison visits every few months, bringing family documents and photographs we display alongside Charles's original ledgers. The daguerreotype of Emma and her father holds the place of honor near the cash register, where her spirit once waited each evening. Visitors often comment on the little girl's bright eyes and how happy she looks standing beside her papa. What surprised me most was discovering my own capacity for this work. I'd taken the job as a temporary solution to financial problems, but somewhere between learning Emma's rules and helping her find peace, I'd found my calling. There's something profoundly satisfying about connecting people with history, about keeping stories alive, not through supernatural preservation, but through genuine human interest. The paranormal investigators still come occasionally, drawn by old reports of activity. Their equipment detects nothing unusual now, but they often leave impressed by the building's authentic atmosphere and the stories we share. Dr. Webb returned last month with his graduate students, more interested in historical preservation than ghost hunting. The absence of supernatural phenomena doesn't diminish this location's significance, he told his class. Sometimes the most powerful hauntings are the ones that end in resolution. I've started dating Sarah Chin, a teacher from Independence Elementary who brings her students here for field trips. She knows about Emma. I told her the whole story one evening after the store closed, expecting her to think I was crazy. Instead, she listened quietly and said, "That little girl was lucky to have someone care enough to help her let go." Sometimes children ask if the store has ghosts, the way children do when they sense something significant about a place. I tell them about Emma, about how she loved this building and the father who built it, about how she learned that love doesn't mean holding on forever. Most seem to understand that better than adults do. The music box still sits in the back room, silent but cared for. I whined it occasionally just to hear the melody Charles hummed while he worked. The song about a little girl braver than dragons and smarter than foxes. The tune seems less melancholy now, more like a lullaby than a lament. Last week, a family from Kansas City brought their 7-year-old daughter for a visit. While her parents browsed the historical displays, she stood transfixed before Emma's photograph. "She looks like she's waiting for something," the girl said. "She was," I replied, "but she found what she was looking for." What was it? I thought about Emma's final moments, about the peace in her smile as she dissolved into starlight. She was waiting to understand that she was loved. Once she knew that for certain, she didn't need to wait anymore. The girl nodded solemnly, the way children do when presented with truths that adults find complicated, but they recognize as simple facts. As closing time approaches each day, I still glance toward the counter where Emma used to appear. Not because I expect to see her, she's moved on to whatever comes after waiting, but because her presence changed this place and everyone who encountered it. Some stories end, others transform into something larger, something that touches lives across generations. Emma Hartwell's story did both.